Hey, what's up? Justin here, and welcome back to 65 Drums. Today we're comparing the two most expensive drum modules in the entire e-drum industry. We have the Pearl Mimic Pro for about $2,200 versus the Roland TD50 for about $2,500. Now, there's more than just a $300 price difference between these. They're completely different, everything from like the sounds to the way they're designed to how many things you can plug into them. And because they're both flagships, that means they're stuffed to the gills full of different features. Okay, so round one is overall sound quality. Let's compare how both of these modules sound like compared to each other. I want to give you some backstory on why these drum modules sound the way that they do. As you can tell, there's a night and day difference as far as the overall tone of the drums and just pretty much everything about the sound entirely. The Pearl Mimic Pro is actually running a piece of drum software they've licensed from Steven Slate Drums. So that's why the Pearl Mimic Pro sounds the way it does. They've licensed some really nice, high quality samples from a separate company. And a lot of us have been begging e-drum companies to do this. You might as well leave it to people that, that's their main job, that's their goal in life. Moving over to the Roland TD50, they recorded their own drums and put them into this drum module. And they decided that because most drummers only use 5 kits usually inside of a drum set, they only recorded 5 drum sets worth of drums. You get 5 snares, 5 kick drums, 2 hi-hats, 2 ride cymbals, a good collection of like different crash cymbals and china and splashes. And then they also have some like hand percussion stuff and electronic drum stuff. Now that's something that the TD50 has that the Pearl Mimic doesn't have. The Pearl Mimic has a vast collection of acoustic drums, way more than the Roland TD50 has. But the TD50 does also have all the hand percussion stuff and electronic elements. And the Pearl Mimic just left those out because it's not inside Steven Slate Drums 5. So like I said, the TD50 only gives you like 5 drum sets worth of acoustic drums and cymbals. But the detail and clarity that you hear when you're drumming on these is really shocking to me. I feel like I'm right there. It's got this immersive quality about it. I don't know what kind of trickery that they did to make it feel like I'm right there. And the fact that the positional sensing is so precise on like the snare and the ride cymbal, it just sounds very immersive. Now the actual tone of the drums, the Pearl Mimic just sounds better to me. And you could put those in with a drum cover or even just a regular song, and they fit right in so well. But I feel like the TD50 does better on the cymbals. The Pearl Mimic lets you use compression, EQ, and some reverb. That's pretty much it. You can also tune drums up and down to make them sound, higher pitched or lower pitched. The TD50 takes it not to the next level, but like 5 levels above that. They let you adjust stuff like the pinginess of the ride, the color of the pinginess of the ride. They let you adjust the thickness of the cymbals. The different kinds of drum heads on the drums, the different kind of snare wires. You get 3 snare wires to choose on all 5 of their snares. And then when you choose one of the snare wires, you get to adjust how loud that snare wire is against the drum head manually, separate from the overall volume of the snare. You could adjust like the overtone volume of the snare. It's like a sound creation tool. You can bend and twist the sounds to your heart's content. But I like the sounds in the Mimic out of the box more, and I just found it easier to get to the tone I wanted. If I had to choose one just based on the sounds alone, I would buy the Pearl Mimic Pro. But some people do prefer the ability to edit the sounds to death, and that's when you would go with the Roland TD50. Round 2 is port selection. How many headphone jacks, how many pad inputs, how many outputs do you have on both these modules? Okay, so starting off with the Pearl Mimic Pro, you get 17 inputs. You can split those and basically double what you got there, plus plug in an extra slave drum module giving you even more inputs. You're not going to run out of extra slots on either one of these drum modules. They've got you covered. You get 16 direct outputs, which are all assignable. 8 of them are 1/4 inch and the other 8 are from a DB25 cable snake, which you will have to buy separately. You've got 1 aux input, 1 headphone jack, MIDI in and out, an SD card slot, and a USB port. Okay, so moving over to the TD50, you get 16 inputs that are all 1/4 inch, plus 3 USB digital pad inputs. The big secret weapon that Roland has here is that you're not just buying a TD50. You're buying into the TD50 ecosystem. They have one of the best snares in the entire world and one of the best rubber ride cymbals, and you can only use those 2 pads on this particular drum module, and that's one of the reasons to buy it. And unfortunately, it's not like 16 plus 3 equals 19. It turns out that plugging in the digital ride mutes those extra inputs, so you can't use all 19 of them at the same time. And just like the Pearl Mimic Pro, you can also split these inputs, so you can have even more than the 16 that are listed there, plus the ability, I believe, to plug in a secondary slave drum module as well. And by the way, I did test this out. You can actually plug LED lights into one of those USB ports and light up your drum set. It actually looks pretty cool, and you can find one of these at Walmart for like $5. I'm not recommending that you do this, but I just thought it was interesting and I wanted to share it. In addition to those 8 user assignable outputs, you also get 4 master outputs. 2 of them are 1/4 inch, and then 2 of them are XLR balanced connections. This is one of my favorite features of this entire drum module. You don't need a direct box to help you go between 1/4 inch and XLR, or a cable that goes from 1/4 inch to XLR. It's just something that saves you time if you actually want to use this live. Another one of my favorite features on this TD50 is the fact that it has 2 mix inputs and 2 headphone jacks. So you never need one of these guys again that you always seem to lose to go from 1/4 inch to 1/8 inch or whatever. Having 2 mix inputs is very useful because it saves you space and you don't need quite as much gear depending on what you need to plug into the module. So for example, I have a Pearl Mimic Pro plugged into one of the mix inputs, and then I have an Elisa Strike multipad plugged into the other of the mix inputs. That wouldn't have been possible with any other drum module unless you had an extra piece of hardware, such as a small mini mixer. You do have an SD card slot, MIDI in and out, and a USB MIDI port. That also does multi-track USB audio over one cable. So you don't even need to have 16, direct outputs. You can just do all of that over one USB cable. So right off the bat, you can see both these modules are incredibly different from each other. The Pearl Mimic Pro sort of leans on having lots and lots of direct outputs. Meanwhile, the TD50 has a more well-rounded offering. The XLR outputs, multiple mix inputs, multiple headphone jacks. I kind of like what the TD50 is doing here, and I know this is going to be opinion-based because you might need to have 16 direct outputs, but I feel like the TD50 offers a more well-rounded port selection, so I'm going to give this round to the TD50. Round 3 is pad compatibility. It's great to have tons and tons of available inputs, but you got to make sure what you're plugging in actually is recognized and works properly. So starting off with the TD50 side, because it's made by Roland and a lot of the industry works on technology similar to Roland's, most things will work with the TD50. Thankfully, the TD50 also has a ton of trigger adjustment options in the settings, so you can make third-party pads work with the TD50 as long as you spend some time in the trigger settings menus. But the Mimic is designed from the ground up to work with everything the TD50 can and cannot work with. So one of the glaring exceptions that the TD50 just won't work with very well are 3-zone, cymbals that just use one cable. Over on the Yamaha side, their ride cymbal and all their crash cymbals actually use 3 zones with one cable. So you won't be able to get those, cymbals getting all 3 zones working on the Roland TD50 drum module. You're probably going to use a digital ride anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Over on the Mimic, it's made to work with every kind of pad out there. It's just designed from the ground up to do that. And there's so many trigger adjustments in the settings that you can just do anything with the Mimic. It's designed to work with everything. It has mass compatibility. And there's only a handful of drum modules in the industry that do that. The Pearl Mimic Pro, the 2-box Drum at 3, the 2-box Drum at 5 Model 2, and the ATV85 drum module. I will give points though to the TD50 in terms of just plugging in a pad and getting it to work. Because the Mimic, it's made to work with everything, meaning you have to make adjustments to make it work with everything. And you need to know a little bit of technical details about how pads work in order to, do all the settings correctly. Over on the TD50, because it works with all Roland pads, when you plug in a pad, there's a good chance that the Roland module will just recognize it. Oh, that's a CY15R, and then it does the settings for you. So as far as ease of use, I like seeing more on the screen of the Mimic. You can just, tap on each snare, you see just more, you can see what's going on. But overall pad setup in the beginning is a little bit easier on the TD50 in my opinion. Round 4 is overall ease of use. On the Pearl Mimic Pro side, it's using a large touchscreen, meaning it's kind of just like using an iPad. If you spend enough time with it and bump around, you'll eventually learn how to use everything. Now, of course, it would be good to go watch my tutorial on it. I'm just, plugging my own videos in here, but I feel like it's a little bit more logical than what the TD50 has. I wish that it had a color screen. Even if it was only the size of a deck of cards, it would be easier to see what's going on. They could fit more on screen with a larger screen. But regardless, they're using the button layout, which some drummers do prefer. Not everyone likes having a touchscreen. I like it. I like it both ways, but some people are anti-touchscreen hardcore. Different drummers will have different opinions on the layouts of these drum modules. I like the way the Mimic does it a little bit more because I think it's a little bit more user-friendly. Now, in defense of the Roland TD50, it has way more editing options than the Mimic. There are obviously going to be more complicated menus because they have more stuff in the menus for you to adjust. I think the 30 was just a little bit easier to use. I'm biased because I own a TD30 and I've used it for years, but I just like the way they set up the menus and that more. If you're gonna go buttons, you might as well have certain buttons for compression, for EQ. I just think that makes it simpler. Okay, so moving on to the next round, we have overall build and durability. Now, thankfully, both modules are using nice, high-quality components. You can unfortunately tell a low or mid-tier budget module from a mile away. They're using very thin plastic. If you twist the modules, that might have a little bit of give to it. The buttons come off a little bit too easily. You can tell when something is cheaply made, just like a cheap cell phone or something. Thankfully, because they're charging such a high price, they are putting the money into the nice, high-quality components. And there's a significant size difference between these as well. The Pearl Mimic Pro is noticeably thinner and a lot smaller in general. So if you want something that can sort of be hidden out of the way around the corner of your drum set or something, the Mimic is the smaller option, and I do like having a little bit smaller of a form factor. I think they could have even shrunk it a little bit more if not for the fact that, you know, quarter-inch inputs just take up a lot of room and they had to make it that size. And meanwhile, the TD50, in order to house all those buttons and knobs everywhere, it has to be significantly larger. It's about the same size as a Roland TD30 or a Roland TD20. So I like the form factor of the Pearl Mimic, but I can't deny, because it does have that big screen, that is kind of a weakness when it comes to durability. There is no way I'm about to do a drop test here, but I will tell you that if I drop this on a concrete floor multiple times, the screen would probably break, or at least if I hit it with a drumstick, it might break. The TD50, because it has that tiny little sliver of a screen, and because it's just freaking humongous, it's going to, you know, survive more drops. It's just more durable. I dropped my Roland TD30 multiple times in trailers running around with it, and it can take a beating. But yeah, both are built very, very well using nice components. The TD50 is more durable though, so I will give it the check in this round. So like I said in the beginning of the video, these two modules are completely different from each other. They're both made by different companies with different approaches and different priorities on what they wanted to include into their flagship drum modules. They're both around the same price. They're both, you know, the most expensive drum modules you can possibly buy, but what you're getting out of them is different. So there's gonna be some drummers that are attracted to the way the Mimic does things, and there are other drummers that will be, you know, more drawn to the way the TD50 is designed and some of the features inside of it. What the TD50 has going for it is that it's built on a framework of a ton of other flagships they've already made. There are features inside of the TD50 that are actually holdovers from the TD10, the TD20, the TD30, and it's like a culmination of just decades of experience in the electronic drum market. The TD50 has a lot of little like weird features inside of it that are just cool. And you only get those kinds of features when you've been working on electronic drums and trying to perfect them for such a long time. But the Pearl Mimic is built by a company that hasn't really done a flagship drum module ever. Like there have been, you know, drum sets they've made before, but nothing of this caliber. And so there's a lot of new ways of looking at things inside of the Pearl Mimic that I just love. It's a little bit more bare bones as far as editing goes and certain other features that you might expect inside of a flagship from a company that's been doing it for a long time. I love the way the Mimic works. I love the way the TD50 works. They're so much fun to use. So if I had to pick a favorite between the two drum modules, for me personally, it would be the Pearl Mimic Pro. Just because I like the characteristics of those sounds better. They're more punchy, they just work out of the box. There's less editing to be done to make the sounds the way I want them to be. I just like the sound set inside of the Pearl Mimic and the fact that there's just more to choose between. The TD50, there's tons of features that I like better than what the Pearl Mimic Pro has. Like, I love all the ports and stuff on the TD50. I wish the Pearl Mimic Pro had the XLR outputs. That is so useful. There's tons of great features in the TD50, but overall, my favorite between the two is the Pearl Mimic Pro. By the way, just wanted to give a big shout out to John and Steven for allowing me to borrow their drum modules for such an extended period of time. That's why I can do this really deep dive into the differences of these modules. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. I'm really interested to read your thoughts. Have an amazing day, and I'll see you on a few.